Hey friends, here's a short primer on how to interpret symbols in Revelation. Because when you read Revelation, you're going to come across numbers like 4, 7, 12, 144,000 and ask, what do those mean? Or you may be confronted with an unholy trinity of beasts, or blazing eyes, or bowls and trumpets, and other symbols that will be about pouring out the wrath of God, a lamb that was slain, and you'll ask the question, what in the world does that mean? Well, I'm going to give you a 4-step process to be able to understand what the symbols in Revelation mean. First of all, you ask the question, what does Revelation say a symbol means? This is the surefire, no-brainer way to interpret a symbol. For example, Revelation chapter 1 begins with Jesus holding 7 stars in his hand and walking among 7 lampstands. What in the world do those mean? Well, it's easy in this case because you just read down to Revelation chapter 1 verse 20 and it says, "The mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand and the 7 golden lampstands is this. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches." Okay, so this is not too complicated to interpret those symbols. If it's not too complicated, don't make it more complicated than it really is. 7 stars are 7 angels, 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. That's the interpretation, easy peasy. It gets harder if the symbol itself is not interpreted inside of the book of Revelation. In that case, you go to step 2, which is look at the rest of the Bible to see if there's an interpretation somewhere else in the Bible. Later on in Revelation chapter 1, it says, one like a son of man shows up with blazing eyes and white hair and a sword coming out of his mouth. And if you know your Bible well, you would be able to tell that in the book of Daniel, chapter 7, is the first reference to one like a son of man. What is it in chapter 7, verse 13? Well, it's somebody who looks a lot like a human being, but is worshipped by everybody in the world. So it's somebody who is both human and God all at the same time. Turns out that Son of Man was Jesus' favorite nickname for himself, and John is playing into this saying this is a God-man, just like it said in Daniel. Daniel also gives interpretations for the blazing eyes being able to see and penetrate all things, the white hair being wisdom and purity. And then Isaiah talks about that sword coming out of Jesus' mouth, and he says that that is justice, a sword is for justice, and coming out of his mouth means that he is speaking words that bring about justice. Now, you may be a novice to the Bible and say, how in the world do I find out where in the Bible the interpretation for those symbols comes from? My encouragement is to get something like a good study Bible. So my favorite is the NIV study Bible, and if you look inside on any of the pages of the Bible, you'll find there's the main text, the comments below, and then these fancy little numbers up here in the corner, which will actually refer you to the verses in the Bible that will tell you what some of those symbols are, and you can do that for yourself. Well, if that doesn't work, if it doesn't say in Revelation and it doesn't say in the Bible what a symbol means, what's our third step? Well, your third step is to look at contemporary culture and say, is there something in contemporary culture that would help us to understand that? And in other words, contemporary, I mean in the culture of the day of John who wrote Revelation. So in one place, Revelation 17:9, it speaks of a city called Babylon that has 7 hills. The problem is that the ancient city of Babylon didn't have 7 hills, and so you ask the question, what are those 7 hills symbolic of? Well, in John's day, the city with 7 hills was commonly known as Rome. Very much like we would say the Windy City is Chicago or the Big Apple is New York, they would know that the city with 7 hills was Rome. So John's giving a clue that when I say Babylon, it's actually a code word for Rome. Well, if all 3 of these steps fail, then the last thing you do is you just use common sense, or you ask, is there a broader spiritual sense to what's happening here to understand the symbol? So one symbol can be illustrated on all 4 different levels. It's the symbol of Babylon. It can be interpreted as level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4 if you know what you're doing. On level 1, the question is, what does Revelation say? Well, in Revelation it says that Babylon is like a great whore. She's riding on a horrible beast. She's full of greed and lust and adultery. So we know that about Babylon just from the text. On level 2, what does the rest of the Bible say? Well, Babylon is a real city along the Euphrates River that was originally known as Babel, where the Tower of Babel, a sign of rebellion against God, was built, and everybody spoke different languages and started babbling. And then on that city was built the city of Babylon that was the capital of the nation of Babylon, and they were famous for coming in, taking over the city of Jerusalem and exiling thousands of people from Jerusalem into Babylon for 70 years. They were a symbol of profound evil. Then on the third level, you have Babylon, the city on 7 hills, and you realize that John is saying Babylon is an evil city for sure, but it's a code word for the nation of Rome, which is a lot like the city of Babylon. And then in the broader spiritual sense, John is giving a warning for all churches in all times, that Babylon and Rome are types. Empire-building cities that have massive economic power and massive military power will become corrupt. They'll abuse the people, they'll become greedy, they will prostitute themselves. So beware, my friends, of Babylon, Rome, and cities across the world that will follow their lead. And there will be a city in the end times, symbolized by Babylon, that will fall in a dramatic manner. So those are the 4 levels of interpretation that you have. Level 1, what does Revelation say? Level 2, what does the rest of the Bible say? Level 3, what does the culture of the day say? And level 4, are there broader spiritual meanings? There are hundreds of symbols in Revelation for you to choose from. Use this simple 4-part paradigm and you'll be able to interpret any of them. For more videos covering Revelation from cover to cover, go to our YouTube channel, CCC Omaha.